Welcome back to Quiet Minds, Rich Lives, a podcast where we explore the powerful and often overlooked connection between your mental wellness and your wealth. I'm your host, Michael, and today's conversation is one I've been looking forward to. My guest is Dr. Kristen Szabla. She's a neuroscientist, a TEDx speaker, trauma and neuroplasticity expert, as well as the founder of Transforming Pain Now. And what makes her work so extraordinary isn't just the science behind it, it's that she's actually lived it in the past. Dr. Zazba is a survivor of severe childhood sexual abuse, subsequent violence, and mental illness. And rather than letting her story define her ceiling, she let it define her calling. She now brings over a decade of neuroscience expertise researching fear circuitry, emotional regulation, anxiety, depression, and neuroplasticity, together with that lived experience to create something truly rare. Healing that is both deeply personal and biologically grounded. Dr. Zazba helped women move beyond hypervigilance, shame, emotional overwhelm, perfectionism, and chronic survival mode into nervous system regulation, self trust, embodiment, and the real emotional freedom. She has taken the message to TEDx stages, healthcare organizations, leadership conferences, academic institutions, and women's empowerment events around the world. And at the center of what she does is one core truth that I want you to hear right now before we even get started. Trauma responses are not evidence that you're broken. They're evidence that your nervous system adapted to survive. And what the brain learned through trauma is it can learn differently through healing. Whether you've been chasing a financial goal that keeps slipping out of reach, whether stress feels like your default setting, or whether you've done all the right things and feel stuck, no matter what they may be, this episode is for you. Dr. Zazba, welcome to Quiet Minds, Rich Lives. I'm so glad to have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm well. Thank you for inviting me to come on your podcast. I'm excited to be here. And you can just call me Dr. Kristen because it's easier.
Okay, got it. So yeah, I'm so glad to have you on the show with us. I'm curious though, what first drew you into studying trauma and neuroplasticity? Was there a moment that made you feel like this was your life's
So
work?
basically, I experienced quite a bit of trauma growing up, and I was always I was always fascinated by the brain because I was trying to figure out the people around me
Mhm.
and why certain people behave the way they did. And I sometimes I tend to sense energy, and so I knew somebody was anxious or whatever, and they say, "Oh, I'm fine." I'm like, that doesn't make sense to a kid. Um, and so I started reading books about the brain when I was about 11 or 12, and then I thought I wanted to be like either a psychiatrist or a neurologist. But then I decided I really would liked, getting into the learning mechanisms behind underlying things in of like neuropsychiatric disorders and other brain disorders. And what I really wanted to do is I wanted to find the molecule that caused suffering. A molecule is just like something in a cell, and it and I thought if I can find it, something those that cause suffering, then I could somehow, inhibit it or something, and then people wouldn't have to suffer nearly as much. But it turns out the brain is much more complex than that, and so I learned other things.
Right. So it's interesting that you brought up one you like knowing the people around you, watching them, kind of seeing the reason why they behave the way they do, basically is what I gathered from that. I'm the same way
Yeah.
with that whole aspect of it. I love knowing my two favorite topics in life is psychology and finances. I
Okay.
don't know why it's those two things, but I've always loved psychology since I was a kid, like a teenager sort of thing. Finance is something I kind of fell into as I grew up the last 7 years because I think I'm 36, but I'm 7 years young based off of my
I hear
history and
you.
my past experiences and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
finance is what I kind of fell into. But that leads me to this next question. So many high achieving people appear to have it together financially, professionally, or whatever the case may be, but they're often quietly struggling. Would you know what's actually going on underneath the surface of the nervous system?
yeah, probably if they're quietly struggling. I mean, they could be struggling for many reasons, but when people struggle, it creates your brain over time goes from like a regulated state to a threat activated state, and that's called the survival mode. And so people are suffering and, internally having these mini fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses. And a lot of times, they could be in a boardroom giving a speech or a talk, and everybody thinks they're great, but then these little triggers that maybe they can't identify, all of a sudden trigger that response in them because that's why their brain, that's where it's at. And a lot of suffering and anxiety, as well as post trauma responses are a consequence of that brain state.
Okay. So you mentioned a threat activated brain.
Mhm.
Um, I guess how does that survival state show up in everyday decisions? Like including the way people handle money or just risk in general or just any type of stress, whether that be financial,
Yeah,
personal,
well, it
professional.
definitely affects decision making in all areas. When it comes to money, it depends on the person's overall personality to begin with. People can spend recklessly because it gives you a lift, like a dopamine spike,
Right.
and it feels good, and they're temporarily feeling good. Others will be so anxious about money management that they won't spend at all. So, and to the extent that, so they don't give themselves even the basic things they need to that point. So
Hmm.
when it comes to money, and when it comes to decisions like, maybe making a not so wise decision about who to hang out with, maybe putting yourself in dangerous places without, really thinking it through. And that can happen. And also can happen is another way it can happen is isolation.
I definitely have lived experience with that part, with both the spending, the chronic, I guess, savings aspect of it, isolation, all that stuff. My 20s was a wild ride for sure.
Yeah, my
So,
20s was not a good decade either.
no. My 30s are beautiful though. Like,
Yes,
yeah,
I'm so glad to hear that.
they're beautiful right now. And no, it's just gonna get better from there over the course of my 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on and so forth. But trauma responses, I guess they can feel quite, I guess, automatic and out of our control. What is it that what is that and what does that mean for someone trying to make clear-headed decisions in their lives? Could
Well,
they possibly relate to to anything as well with this?
yeah, so, there's like 70% of the people in the United States have experienced or will experience a traumatic event. So that's the majority of us. So the majority of us, have experienced something, whether it's a car accident or witnessing something or a death in the family. Those can all trigger trauma responses in the brain, in addition to other more severe-ish events like, abuse, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And so, the average person in America, at least, probably has experienced trauma at some level, and at some level is in survival mode if they haven't talked and worked it through. And so, what that means for the average person is that that they tend to be in a trauma loop, and there's triggers, whether it's smells, your boss says something to you to do something, and a person might get extra panicked because they're being asked to do something even though they know they've done it before. A
Mhm.
person might be rageful, because trauma can produce rage, because some people who have been hurt in the past, harbor resentments, which only hurts themselves rather than the other people.
Right.
And so yeah, uh I can be more specific if you want me to.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
And
Like an
do you
example or something like that.
well, yeah, so I know a woman. She had been sexually assaulted, and she was working in an advertising firm,
Mhm.
and she was like, up up there like a VP in the advertising firm. And so basically she looked like she had it all together. She people respected her. She supervised, a team of people. However, when her supervisor, um, would ask her something, or when she would think of a deadline or something, all of a sudden she would go into a panic attack, even though nothing, she was not in danger.
Mhm.
And she had done those things before and knew how to do it. It just automatically it was just a trigger back to her original trauma. And that
Yeah.
her feelings were not congruent or consistent with what was actually going on. And this can be very silent. You may not notice, it'll be all in the brain. A lot of
Mhm.
times, you might notice some of these people that have this issue, they may, take a break in the bathroom for a while, or go walk around to try to calm down, but and so it's like, sometimes she was saying that, the Microsoft Teams, I don't know if you're familiar with Microsoft Teams,
Yeah,
but, you
I
know,
am.
communicating at work, buzz, especially remote work, buzz, buzz, buzz. And it would always like trigger like she'd jump, because like, what's this now? So that's
Right.
kind of how it pans out. And it can affect all of her relationships. If she has children, relationships with children, relationships with partners, friends, etc.
Okay. So, do you know if she's doing better by chance? I know it might get a little
Yes,
off
she
topic
is.
right here, but she is? That's awesome. Okay. So, this, I guess, leads me to my next question about, like, I guess, how do I frame this? So, like, why is intellectual insight alone often not enough to heal trauma? And I ask this
Because
because I feel like a lot of people listening have read books, they've done the therapy, and they
yeah,
still
yeah,
probably feel stuck.
yeah. And the reason is because intellect when you talk about things in an intellectual way and you read a book, and it's basically all in your cortex. So particularly the prefrontal cortex. So you're taking in information, you're saying maybe what happened, and speech is in the cortex. The speech center of
Yeah.
our brain is in the cortex, but the things that get triggered for trauma are things like the amygdala, the hippocampus. The amygdala is the seat of fear. The hippocampus stores fear memories, and also what happens in people who are in a survival mode is the brain actually changes. It changes structure. It changes connections. So
Mhm.
the prefrontal cortex, which is our rational mind, our thinking brain, that's the brain you use when you're taking a test. It actually shrinks. And the amygdala, which is the seat of fear, and the amygdala is working whenever feel anxiety about a test. That's the amygdala sending signals to your body saying, I need to be anxious about this. I'm not prepared. It actually increases in volume. So you have this overwhelming fear response that keeps cycling through without control from the prefrontal cortex, if that makes sense.
It does. It does to me anyways. I'm sure if, like,
And
anyone in the audience has have questions, they can just leave comments below or anything like that with it, and
yeah,
we can try to
and the
answer
prefrontal
it.
cortex, what it really does is it actually, when it's working properly, it regulates your limbic system, and the reason it does that is it sends projections to the nervous system that inhibit. I mean, sorry, not the nervous system, the limbic system, to actually inhibit those processes. So you're a more regulated state, but when you're in a threat activated state, the limbic system is overactive, and your prefrontal cortex is underactive, so you don't have like a clamp to put a clamp on it, or break on it.
Okay. So, with, like, I guess it can leave a lot to, like, I guess, self-sabotaging sort of thing when it comes to
It certainly can,
things of
especially if
this
somebody
manner.
hasn't, really talked about or understood how their trauma or life experiences connects with their behavior.
Right. So, why do trauma survivors sometimes self-sabotage? Whether that's in, like, relationships, career growth, or even wealth building or whatever in their current stages of life.
Um, it's different for everyone.
Okay.
Sometimes they're not aware of it. Sometimes they're basically recapitulating a trauma. They're reenactivating this trauma loop inside themselves, because when you self-sabotage, say, um, you know, you spend too much money and you don't have enough money for rent or something like that, right? Um, you're going to go into a survival mode because you know you have to pay rent in order to stay living somewhere, and that's not on the street. And they're so used to that trauma cycle, that trauma loop in their brain that a lot of times they unconsciously reenact it.
Okay, sorry, I had to mute there for a sec because my dog.
That's okay.
But
And
yeah,
also one more point. I don't know if you've heard of the trauma triangle. It's like an
no,
inverted triangle. And
okay,
the victim, the person, who's the victim is, like any person, is at the bottom of the point of the triangle. And then you have the persecutor and the rescuer. And a lot of times what happens is that um these like someone who persecuted them is talking to them in their brain. You repeat things in your own voice, what
hmm,
you were told, and then you have a rescuer that you want but never got, if you had a significant trauma. And so you can either cause yourself to you're persecuting yourself, and you feel bad, so you go do something that may maybe make you feel quote unquote good for temporarily, but may not be the right choice, like spending money to get, I don't know, a car and then
right,
not having money for rent. And then other people, want to be rescued. So they're more like they're more of what you would call a person who stays like victimized. They kind of like want to be want to stay victim, whether they know it or not logically.
okay. So I guess this comes down to like neuroplasticity, how like the brain when it's in survival mode because of like past trauma. I believe a lot of your work is centered around healing as well, and like kind of like rewiring or re putting the brain back together in like a healing
Yeah.
form.
So basically, neuroplasticity is the brain's basically remarkable ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. This means your brain is not fixed. It can change, it can heal, it can grow.
Hmm.
Neuroplasticity is how you became a traumatized brain. But if it goes that way, it can go the other way. It's basically new connections can be created if we strengthen the connections that serve us. Existing connections can be strengthened or weakened. And the brain adapts based on experience, focus, and practice. So we can practice tactics that actually serve us, and that will develop new neural pathways. So, for example, if you think of a ping pong ball, two ping pong balls,
Okay.
one you're always no matter what you do, it seems it's always going metaphorically up and to the right, up and to the right. And it it tells you, I suck. I'm so ashamed. I'm disgusted with myself. I hate myself. Those kind of things. That
Hmm.
grows because it's happening all the time, and no matter what you do, it keeps going that way. Well, then, if you can practice tactics that actually can regulate your nervous system and serve you, you can throw another ping pong ball metaphorically up and to the left. And over time, that pathway strengthens while the trauma pathway weakens.
Okay. So I kind of envisioned like a rope on one and how it gets tight towards the negative side, and as you're strengthening that muscle for the positive side, it does like gets more loose on the negative side, I guess, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
it kind of like gets smaller. Like that pathway isn't as easy to obtain. So you go through
Right.
the pathway that serves you first, rather than through the trauma pathway that you used to learn. You learned over time.
Okay, I feel like I can relate a lot to that because like we were talking about previously, I did go through like 7 years of growth. Well, 5 years of growth, 2 years of just like and like recovery and just kind of like healing myself, sort of thing.
Yeah,
Um, but I guess this leads me to like a next question, sort of thing. Is just why does trauma feel so automatic and uncontrollable?
that's because, like I said, the prefrontal cortex, which is your thinking brain, it's
Okay,
offline. It goes offline, and
that's right.
because it's actually become smaller due to all the hormonal changes that occur in a person who's been traumatized. And it's so automatic because the amygdala, it fires before the cortex or anything can make sense of it. So, and the
Okay.
amygdala again is a seat of fear, and it triggers a cascade of signals that trigger hormones, adrenaline, cortisol, the stress response. And so it's practicing connecting these two regions because you want to have like the cortex, to regulate that and learn.
Hmm.
And every experience is a learning experience because a lot of times, like, for example, going back to my example of the woman at the advertising agency, she would start by telling herself when she started panicking automatically, she would say, okay, this feeling I'm having is not consistent with what's going on. And that's the first step. You have,
Hmm.
and then, and there's certain things you can do. There's certain things you can do every day to, help yourself get out of survival mode. I don't know if you want me to go through those, but I'm happy to.
Yeah, you can, definitely can. I like to
So,
have as much information as possible on this platform.
so basically, the brain has a negativity bias, and what do I mean by that? We remember bad things much more easily than when we remember good things. It's harder for us
Right.
to remember our achievements for some reason, and the reason is is evolutionary. I mean, we were hunters and gatherers. We had to look for danger to survive at one point, but that feature of our brain doesn't really serve us now as much.
Hmm.
So that's why what I have my clients do is every day they write down, their intention for the day and how they're feeling. And then like get 5 to 10 gratitudes a day because that triggers positive feelings. And then they write down 5 affirmations about themselves, and then they write down at the end of the day, they identify 3 good things that happened that day, no matter how bad that day was. So even if
Right.
they had most of the day spent suicidal, they still write 3 things good that happened because you can find them. It's amazing. And
That's very true. So it's funny you bring that up. I'm sorry not to just cut you off on there,
no
but
worries. Go ahead.
um, I don't believe in bad days. Even though
Mhm.
I've had a lot of bad days in my past,
Right.
I've retrained my way of thinking that if I'm having like a bad day sort of thing, it's not a bad day itself because I'm lucky to be alive. I'm lucky to step outside that front door to go do whatever I need to do for that day sort of thing, whether it be, work or enjoy life with my wife or what have you.
Mhm.
But I feel like every day is a good day. If you're having a bad day, it's just a hiccup in that good day. You can always find good within that bad day, and that will help you.
Yes,
Just not
absolutely.
help you, I guess, struggle as much with that way of thinking,
Yeah,
sort of
and
thing.
sometimes a person might wake up, like say they have depression, they wake up depressed and thinking they
Hmm.
can't get out of bed. But and they can choose to not get out of bed and choose to have a day in which they spend depressed in bed, or they can choose to wake up, get up, take a shower, you know, if they're on medication, they take medication and they
Right.
do some gratitude, some affirmations, and just start work. And then some
Hmm.
things start going better.
It
So
it
it's
does, and it's definitely easier said than done, sort of thing, I guess.
oh,
But it does
totally.
get easier over
It is
time.
it's a skill you have to learn. It's about taking action when you really don't want to.
Hmm.
And when you take action, if you stay in a state of inertia, nothing's going to change. But if you take some
Correct.
kind of positive action, something it will change for the better. But it can be super hard sometimes. I know I've
Yes.
experienced it myself, and
Hmm.
I just I it's like sometimes it felt like I was fighting gravity, like gravity was pulling me down, like I could barely walk.
Yeah.
Metaphorically speaking.
Course. Of course, it feels like everything aches, all that stuff too, kinda like a chronic pain sort of thing, which is
Right.
I don't know if you know much about that subject matter itself, but, like, the mental health side of things and how it can affect your physical health as well.
Oh, it's very interconnected. I mean, so, mental illnesses, just to clarify for everybody who may, not know, may not think that mental illnesses are really real. They are complex, whole brain disorders. They
Mhm.
also affect the body. People with mental illnesses, are more likely to die from a cardiovascular event. They're more likely to have chronic kidney disease. They're more likely to have autoimmune diseases,
Hmm.
cancer, all that kind of stuff. So it really affects the whole body, and so a great way to because of what it does, there's a hypothesis out there, which I personally believe, a lot of people with mental health issues have this higher state of inflammation, a chronic inflammation, and that can do deleterious things to your whole body. And a way to control um, you know, chronic inflammation is what you eat. Eat healthy, do
Hmm.
yoga, do something that moves your body and breathe, and that calms it all down. But it's a practice. You have to get in the habit and the routine, and it takes time.
It does. It definitely does. So I got like, I guess one more question for you, sort of thing.
Sure.
What do you? How do I phrase this? What do you want most of trauma survivors to understand? I think I said that kind of wrong, but I think you might understand what I'm trying to
I
ask.
understand what you're saying. I
Okay,
want them
I'm
to know
sorry.
that one, it's not your fault. You're not alone.
Hmm.
I see you. I hear you, and that the way you're surviving now can be better, and you can become a person that is empowered, thriving, and authentic.
I love
And
that.
it's possible.
I love
Not only
that.
possible,
That's
probable.
that's very true. I do. I love your answer with that whole thing. So I guess I just want to leave it here with this. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today, Kristen. This conversation is one that I think, I guess, a lot of people need to hear and maybe didn't even know they needed to hear until now. I guess what stays with me is in this is that feeling of being perpetually stuck. That's not just a character flaw. That's simply just the nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do, as well as the fact that it can be retrained, and that healing, it's not just possible, it's also biological, and that just changes everything.
Yeah, it is very
So tell
biological.
me, yeah,
Go
so
ahead.
tell me, where can the audience find your work and or get in contact with you?
Transformingpainnow.com.
Okay, simple.
And I offer free consultations if anybody's interested to see, you know, just talk and see what's going on and see
Yeah,
if you might want to work with me. And I also
that's
offer
awesome.
some groups as well. So there's a
Yeah,
variety of options for people.
awesome. So thank you for sharing that, Dr. Kristen. So something in today's episode stirs something in you. Don't let that feeling pass. And to everyone listening, I leave you with the words that Dr. Kristen mentioned. You are not broken and you're not behind. You're simply becoming. And
And
thank
we're
you for
all
being,
becoming.
yeah. Thank you for
Always.
being here. Share this episode with someone who needs it. And we'll see you next time on Quiet Minds, Rich Lives. Take care, everyone.
Thank you for
Again, thank
having
you,
me.
Dr. Kristen. You're welcome.
Bye bye.